It comes with great sorrow that I am devastated to announce that last week Tamia Taylor was unfortunately found deceased in the Mississippi River. It is currently unknown how she ended up there, however it is strongly believed she fell whilst on board the Memphis riverboat cruise, and her death has since been ruled as drowning. However, this does not mean she ended up in the water on her own accord. In fact, there are still many possibilities, and based on the evidence available, I personally think it's likely that somebody else may be involved. Whether it was a person who was on board at the time, or perhaps the suspicious eyewitness who saw her walking away from the boat. But either way, hopefully the Memphis police will release further information soon, so we can find out what really happened here, to make sure Tamia and her family get the justice they deserve. So in this video, I will be both assessing and attempting to answer some of the questions that still surround this case, to hopefully narrow down the investigation and bring us closer to the truth. But just before we get into the theories themselves, I will just quickly recap what we know so far about this case. So on Saturday the 9th of September earlier this month, the 21-year-old woman was out celebrating her birthday on a riverboat in Memphis, Tennessee, when she mysteriously disappeared. She was last seen walking upstairs to use the bathroom after leaving her cell phone with her friends. However, this would be the last time anybody would officially see the young mother of two. After her friends had left the riverboat at around 1:30 AM, they discovered that Tamia was not with them. However, they assumed that she had just left with somebody else, as she was seen flirting with a man on the boat. Later on, an eyewitness would go on to say that he saw Tamia along with some friends walking home after exiting the riverboat, and so it was assumed by many that she had simply disappeared at her own accord. However, when she didn't arrive home that night, Tamia's mother Deborah decided to officially report her daughter as missing to the Memphis police, worried she may be in danger. Shortly after, they started their search of the Mississippi River, and at first they were unable to locate the missing woman, and people started to think she may have been kidnapped by somebody after leaving the boat. But then, on the 23rd of September, exactly 2 weeks after she was first reported as missing, a body was found in the river, and later identified as Tamia Taylor. All we know right now is that her cause of death was classed as drowning, but after an entire week of investigation, we still have no confirmation on how she ended up in the water. So with that, let's get into some of the theories. Now, before we get into some of the more controversial explanations, I thought it would be best to start by assessing the plausibility of Tamia falling overboard herself. So we know from witnesses on board the Memphis riverboat that night that Tamia was severely drunk, so it wouldn't be inconceivable to imagine she could have accidentally fallen overboard after using the bathroom. It's certainly possible that she could have stopped to look over the side of the boat to take in the atmosphere, but after leaning too far forward, she may have slipped over the rails. The bathroom was located at the top of the boat by all accounts, so it certainly could have offered views that were worthy of taking in. But I have two issues with this theory which I struggle to shrug off. Firstly, why was Tamia heading to the bathroom all on her own, despite being with her friends at the time? It is usually common courtesy for female friends to stick together whilst attending parties, so the fact that Tamia was left on her own, as drunk as she was, and her friends weren't the least bit concerned for her, is a red flag in my opinion. Of course, her friends may have just made a bad call at the time, and perhaps they now feel incredibly guilty that they didn't join her. But regardless, this behaviour is certainly suspicious to say the least, and should be investigated further in my opinion. Now, my second problem with this theory is that Tamia strangely chose to leave her cell phone with her friends before leaving for the bathroom. Now, on its own, this is irregular behaviour for anybody, let alone a 21-year-old woman. However, given that she was drunk at the time, I would find it extremely hard to believe she would feel safe enough to make this decision. Then again, if she was extremely drunk, perhaps she just made a bad call, and with her friends likely just as drunk as she was, they also made a bad call in letting her go alone. But either way, I think before we confirm that Tamia's death was in fact an accident, we need to make sure we look at all of the other plausible explanations so her family get the closure and potential justice they deserve. So for argument's sake, let's say Tamia didn't fall overboard by accident. and therefore we have a possible suspect in our midst that is responsible for her untimely death. But who would have had the motive to take her life in this way? Well, the first place to look, in my opinion, would be this mysterious man she was seen flirting with that offered to buy her a drink earlier in the night. We do not know who this man was, but it's possible he could have followed her up to the bathroom, and when she rejected him, he did something drastic. This is merely speculation, but if Tamia didn't fall off on her own accord, that means somebody had to be there to push her over the edge. But as we have barely any evidence at this time, it's difficult to build any kind of strong conclusion here. Perhaps a stronger theory would be that one of her very own friends was responsible for Tamia's death. As I previously mentioned, it was strange to let Tamia head to the bathroom on her own, but what if she wasn't alone? What if one of her friends was with her, and for whatever reason, they got into an argument which ended in tragedy? Again, I have no evidence for this, but Tamia's strange behaviour that night to leave her phone on the table and head upstairs all alone certainly seems to be suspicious, so maybe this was just a story made up by her friends to relieve culpability. But without any confession, we will never be able to confirm this theory, as there were no security cameras on board the Memphis riverboat at the time. So without the answers, we have to ask, who else could have been responsible? A random person on board that she got into an altercation with inside the bathroom, perhaps? Or maybe an employee of the riverboat who saw her alone and drunk and decided to take advantage. These ideas again are impossible to verify, but they are leads that the police should at the very least continue to investigate until they have a definitive explanation for Tamia's death. But what if Tamia didn't fall overboard whatsoever? Her body was found in the Mississippi River, which is a key contributor to this premise, but if Tamia did in fact make her way off the boat that night, as the eyewitness stated, perhaps her body was simply dumped in the river as a method of hiding the truth. Well, according to the eyewitness himself, Tamia was seen walking away from the cruise ship after it was docked with a small group of people. We were not able to verify who these people were, but with Tamia's friends claiming to have last seen her on the boat itself, it would seem that if this was in fact Tamia, she was walking away with a different group of people, perhaps a group that wanted to cause her harm. So if we continue down the rabbit hole of this theory, perhaps once this group had Tamia alone, they decided to end her life for one reason or another, and then ditched her body in the river after the fact. The police were meticulously searching in the Mississippi River for days and found nothing, and then all of a sudden her body turns up 2 weeks later. So this theory may explain this strange timeline of events. But if this is true, who would want to do something so horrific to Tamia, and why? Well, perhaps this eyewitness isn't quite as innocent as he seems. It's not uncommon for suspects to stay close to a case as a method of blending in and removing culpability. After all, who would suspect the kind witness who took time out of his day to speak to the media about what he saw? Now, it's very possible that this man is completely innocent here, so I will just say now I have absolutely no evidence against him. However, I still think it's important that we turn over every stone. So if the eyewitness was guilty of something, perhaps he chose to leave this red herring to lead people to think Tamia was not in the river and had simply disappeared. After all, now that she has been found in the river with a cause of death labelled as drowning, it is more than likely that she did fall overboard, and therefore his testimony is inaccurate. Then again, of course, Tamia could have been thrown into the river after the fact as posed earlier, but the suspect responsible for this could have just as easily been the golf cart driver to move suspicion from himself. But once again, as of right now, we have no hard evidence to prove any of these theories. So for now, all we can do is continue to speculate on what may have happened, and hope that the Memphis police continue to investigate this case, so that Tamia and her family get the justice they deserve. So with that, I think I'll leave this video here, but just before I go, I wanted to take a moment to think about the Taylor family and what they must be going through. The fact is, no matter how Tamia died, a young, beautiful person has been taken from the world, and it's a problem that requires a solution. Whether that's better surveillance on riverboats or the illegalization of booze cruises in general. One thing that is for certain is that regulations need to be put in place for the safety of the passengers on board. But until that day, we first need to know what truly happened to Tamia Taylor. So please leave your theories and condolences in the comments below, and let's work together to try and find closure for the Taylor family. Thank you for watching.